Um, I'll just list the 16 different types of poetic Cs or bihar or rhythms that exist in Arabic literature. So the first one is at-tawil. Second one is al-basit. Third one is al-wafir or al-wafir. Fourth one is al-muqtatab. Fifth one is al-muqtadarak. Sixth is al-rajas. Seventh is al-khafif. Eighth is al-hazaj. Ninth is al-mutakarrib. 10th is al-munsarih. 11 is al-kamil. 12 is al-ramal. 13 is al-khabab. 14 is as-sariyah. 15 is al-madid. 16 is al-mujtat. Now, why is the Quran unique? Because some people used to say that the Quran is poetry. But the best poet at the time, he disagreed. He's a man who knows all of these different types of poetry and the different patterns of long and short vowels. I think it's Al-Walid bin Mughayra. He said, look, I know all the different types of poetry and I am the best poet amongst you. What Muhammad speaks, peace be upon him, is not poetry, it's something else. And it's also, when you hear the Quran or when people who are versed in Arabic hear the Quran, they can definitely say that it's not normal speech. So it's not the type of prose called mursal, which is just normal speech. Nor is it the other type, the saj'a, the rhythmic speech that politicians make. Which is why at the time they were amazed. Even though Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam entered some verses in poetry competitions and he won those competitions, that's another proof that it is superior. But they knew that it wasn't normal speech and it wasn't the same as a prepared speech. Even though a prepared speech has many of the rhetorical devices like repetition, alliteration, something called parallelism, when you have lines which have the same structure repeated. Even if though they share a lot of these things, people will say that it is not. And let me just quote somebody. Okay, the Quran is not. Again, it's Sheikh Sharawi. He says that the Quran is not a metrical speech, non-metrical speech, they say, because it's almost impossible for the listener to detect the shift from one form to the other, nor does this exquisite mingling impinge on the fluidity of expression or impair its meaning. So this is him saying the Quran is not the other thing, which is a mixing of poetry and prose, which is something that was developed after the Quran and copied from the Quran. People based this upon some of the verses of the Quran, how it works. It was called makama, which is the other thing. So you have poetry, 16 different types. Quran is not like any of those. And all other Arabic poetry actually can be put into one of those 16 categories. But the Quran cannot. And it's not mursal, which is normal speech. It's not saj'a, which is the prepared rhythmic speech. And it's also not, later on, some people, they combine poetry and prose in a way, they call it makama. And the Sheikh Sha'rawi here is saying the Quran is not like that, because while in makama you have some prose, then some poetry, then some prose, then some poetry, and you can tell when it's changing from prose to poetry easily. And this is like the plays that Shakespeare wrote. In Shakespeare's plays, you have some parts that are like ordinary speech, and then suddenly he starts doing some rhyming speech. Then he goes back to ordinary speech. So Maqama is like Shakespeare. But the Quran is not, it doesn't switch. It's what they call a unique fusion, a complete blend, so that, as the Sheikh Sha'rawi says, it's impossible for the listener to detect when it's shifting from prose to poetry. You can't change. You can't say which bit's poetry and which bit's prose. In fact, it's just a completely unique style that you can't find anywhere else. The reason why it's not saj'a is because there is things in the Quran that is very different from what you find in the saj'a. One of the things is that there is a greater amount of something called monorhyme, which is that you have the same ending on every line repeated. Not like where you have, say in a sonnet, you have a rhyming pattern where you have A, B, A, B. So the second word, the last sound, is different from the sound of the first word's last sound. But the third word and the first word, they are the same, and the second and the fourth are the same. In Quran, there's a greater amount of what they call monorhyme, which is you can have like 10 or 12 or 20 verses, lines. All of them have the same sound at the end. And this is much more difficult to do. And it says it has some inexact rhyme, means some very complicated rhyme that doesn't exist in the rhythmic speech that is in Saj. A greater range of rhythmic phrases and a higher frequency of rhetorical features. And something that Hamza Zotis of Aira pointed out, he said that one of the things about the Quran is that you cannot take away a single word without to change the meaning. With some of these other saj'a, prepared speeches, or you can remove some of the words and the meaning will stay the same. And the issue is that in the Quran there's so many rhetorical devices, meaning techniques to make the speech pleasing and persuasive. Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best person who has spoken, and his speech is the best of speeches. So his speech has the best in persuasiveness and is the most pleasant speech. So when they analyze bits of the Quran, so Hamza Zotis analyzed the shortest verse in the Quran, only three. So first shortest surah with the 3 verses, Al-Kawthar. He said that in these 3 lines there are so many rhetorical devices packed into 3 lines. So this is like you can't find this in any other speech, and you can't take away a single line from these very few. Single word from these very few words without to change the meaning. Meaning it's completely perfect. It's been edited, or it hasn't been edited in terms of it's produced already perfect without anything in there that is redundant, anything in there that's unnecessary, anything in there that can be changed to a different word that will make it better. So sometimes you write something, a poem or prose, and you show it to someone else and he says, why don't you change that word to this other word? It will make it sound better. But in the Quran, there's no place where you could change one word for another word of similar meaning to make the whole structure or the grammar or the sound of it or the rhythm of it or the rhyme of it improved. You can't do it. With Saj, you can. That's why the Quran is not like Saj'a. It's not like other prepared speech. So whether it's Obama's Yes We Can speech, yeah, or the Queen's speech to the United Nations last year, where she let them know that she's actually queen of 16 of their member states, very politely. You can change a word in those speeches to improve it. Or you could take a word out without to change the meaning, but you can't do this to the Quran. So now we come back to the 2 things I mentioned earlier. One was the surah like it. So Hamza Sotis, he analyzed one of the surah like it verses. It's called Surah Iman. Surahlikeit.com. They've got a load of them. They take some surahs from the Quran and they change a few bits and pieces and they say, look, we've produced a surah like it. But his comments are, he says, in the first verse of this Surah Iman, they use the word riyah for stormy wind, but the word riyah doesn't mean stormy wind, it means a wind that brings blessings. So he's identified an error. They should have used another word which means stormy wind. Then he says that there are loads of words that you could remove from the first, second, fourth, eighth and the ninth verse, and it wouldn't change the meaning. So you could improve it. He says that you could actually cut the Surah Iman in surahlikeit.com in half and it will still have the same meaning.